I've been very privileged and fortunate, lucky to have gone to a lot of places in the world, and I've been to places that either are or have faced great conflict, war, you name it. And whenever I'm in those places, I've been fortunate to meet people face to face. And like I have never met anybody who wished harm on another individual or wished harm on the supposed other side. That's what gives me hope is that having met people around the world who have faced things that I can never imagine facing. And they still, many of them seem to harbor no ill will to those who wrong them, and they just want to live their lives in peace.
Hey, it's Yulia, and this is Going Places, a show about fascinating places near and far and the people who make them better. Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Yulia Denisyuk. Today, we're speaking with Joe Baur, a travel, food, and adventure writer and filmmaker born and raised just outside of Cleveland, Ohio. These days, Joe is based in Berlin, hitting the trails across Europe and the world as often as possible in search of stories and new ways to torture himself, all of which he documents on his YouTube channel. He's written for Outside Magazine, BBC Travel, National Geographic, and more, and you can follow him on Instagram at BaurJoe. We'll also link to Joe's Substack newsletter in which he shares essays like the one titled "The US is the Greatest Place on Earth Until You Start Traveling," which we'll talk about today. Joe and I met on a work trip to Okinawa last fall, and we immediately connected over our shared view of the world and shots of awamori, the Okinawan rice spirit. In this conversation, we talk about what Joe learned traveling to places with conflicts, what it's like running the Oman Desert Marathon, how living in Berlin impacted his views on American life, and why he's an uncommon YouTuber. I also loved Joe's reflections on what he learned about the United States while living outside of it for almost a decade, and why he wants to age in reverse. Joe and I approach storytelling in much the same way. We want to share stories of people we meet in places we travel to, amplifying their voices and letting them tell their own story. In a way, it's about telling a story of a place through its people and, hopefully, instilling some hope along the way. This is exactly what we're doing on our reimagined Going Places platform. We're cultivating hope. We just launched as a reader and audience-supported platform, which means that you can be in community with us on this journey. And thank you so much to all of the members who've already decided to join us. You can become a Going Places member for as little as $6 a month, and there are lots of perks associated with our membership, like getting on a group call with me every month to ask questions, get advice, and be in community with each other. We also share creator opportunities like winning a scholarship to a travel conference in California this August, and much more. Visit goingplacesmedia.com to check it out and see how you can join us. All right, now on to our conversation with Joe. Dear Joe, welcome to the podcast. So excited to have you on today.
I'm very excited to be here, Yulia. Thanks for having me on.
And welcome back to the United States of America, where you're currently visiting.
Visiting being the operative word. I'm still very much based in Berlin these days. But yes, it's nice to visit. I know there's obviously bigger headlines happening here, but it's always nice to see family. I'm here for my father's 80th birthday. I can say here because he's not gonna know, but 80th surprise birthday party, and that'll be next weekend. So there's happy family distractions.
It's always good to come and see family. It's always good.
Absolutely.
And you're from Ohio, if I remember
Yep.
correctly, right?
Yep.
So that's
From just
where.
outside of Cleveland, Ohio. That's where I am right now.
Nice, nice. I saw a post of yours just before we got on here about and by the way, everybody should follow Joe on Instagram and elsewhere. We'll have the links in the show notes, but you guys should follow him for some of these very interesting, I would say, thoughts out loud and conversations that Joe is posting. One of the posts that you just recently posted that I saw before coming on here was about this sort of reflection on America being
greatest country on earth, or rather the indoctrination that people receive. And it's so interesting to me, and that's where I guess I would love us to start, because I come from a very different perspective, right? I came to this country when I was 16. I was already indoctrinated into a very different philosophy. And so I never saw, to be honest, I never saw what the big deal was behind, like, or like, rather, I never saw the basis for this philosophy of, we're the greatest country on earth. And so it's just so interesting. It was so interesting for me to see your post, because it was kind of like, oh, people kind of hear this from the time they're little, so no wonder people think that way.
Yeah. It's not even that you'd hear it, it's just like I said in the post, it's just in the ether, like, it's you don't think about breathing air because you just do it naturally. You don't think about the US being the supposed greatest country on earth because it's just it's out there, it's in the air, it's just what you breathe, and like I said in the thing that I don't there's not like there's a point in my life where I remember, like, and that is when I learned that the US is the greatest country on earth, or there wasn't, like, a lesson.
Right.
There are certainly stories that maybe help amplify that stories, and not to go down too much of a tangent, but that's what it likes to do. It's I can see why where kernels of truth can be used in, like, things you learn in school can be used to, like, make you think that, so we learn a lot, at least I did. Education system varies drastically state by state, community by community, but I at least remembering a lot about, like, immigration history and how, Statue of Liberty, "Give me your tired, your poor, your hungry masses," all that stuff that, like, really helped build the country in in modern terms, and so, like, I get and those are things that I think are positive. I'm an immigrant myself in Germany, so I'm very biasedly pro-immigrant, and so I can see how, like, that kernel of truth that, like, yes, it is a great country for so many people who came here for a variety of reasons, persecution, opportunity, whatever it is, as refugees. It's a great country, and so I can see how, like, that kernel of truth can be twisted or amplified or whatever to just be broadly said, like, "greatest country on earth." So those are things that I tend to think about a lot when either through travel or whenever I'm back here, or even because I was born here and I decided to emigrate myself to another country, and so I almost kind of feel bad to my ancestors who, like, came from Eastern Europe or other parts of Europe and came here for their salvation and opportunity. And, I never have to had a chance to ask like my great grandparents, but I presume in some sense when they left, they thought like, this is where you got to go. This is the best country on earth. And so I feel a little bad sometimes thinking back, like, well, actually, I found my grass is greener elsewhere. So
Yeah.
those are all being back here always brings up all those kind of thoughts.
Absolutely. I can very much relate to that, because that's the similar kind of thoughts that I have every time I return here from elsewhere. And I think I do feel like you and I share a lot of similar ways in which we look at the world. I think that's why we originally connected. And everything you're saying, resonates with me so much. And I think the irony of that phrase, "give me your poor, your hungry, your whatever, whatever," like, how have we been failing spectacularly on that, as a country, on that promise. But again, let's not get into that too much, because today I want to focus on other things. But I do want to call out how interesting it was that you called yourself an immigrant to Germany, not an expat. Why do you think that is?
Why do I consider myself an immigrant? Or I mean, I think so that this is some again, I don't want to go too much of a tangent, but this is something
Hey,
that I
podcasts are meant for tangents.
that's true. Yeah, yeah. You don't have, and now for a quick commercial break from our sponsor, Insurance. In the middle of talking about immigration. So this is something that I think is really interesting to talk about, or that I like talking about. And I don't know if there's always like most things, I don't think there's a clear black and white, yes, right, wrong answer. But I don't know if I ever used the word expat for myself in any context. If I would have, it maybe would have been when I lived in Costa Rica for a year. I went to graduate school there, and basically anybody who is from the US or Canada would call themselves an expat. And I think the reasons people would call themselves an expat there, as opposed to why some people, I don't hear it often, but sometimes people do in Germany, where I now live and lived for the past 8 years, or you'll see it sometimes in like Facebook groups, like, you know, English speaking or American expats in Germany. I think the reasons might be different. In Costa Rica, most people who are from like the United States or Canada, they're there as retirees or and kind of grinded my gears a little bit. But some people would open like businesses like B&Bs or whatever for tourism, and they would stay on a tourist visa, leave the country every 3 months, just hop over the border in Panama, for example, come back. And so like they were never officially registered, and it just didn't feel like they were giving back to the society from which they were benefiting. And if I called myself an expat then, and I honestly don't know if I did or not, but if I did, it's probably because I would've saw myself as temporary, because I never saw Costa Rica as a place that, like, I'm gonna move here, like, I'm immigrating to Costa Rica. This is where I'm gonna set roots and live forever. And I love Costa Rica, like, I think I probably think about it once a day, how badly I wanna go back to
Oh,
my little pueblo, Ciudad Colon, and just see how much it's changed, and I still keep in loose contact with, the Ticos that rented our apartment. We lived above them. So I have very fond memories of it, but there was never a point in which my wife and I thought that like we're going to live here forever. So we are no longer expats, immigrants. And to me, I think that's the linguistic distinction. I know there's the cultural distinction of like basically if you're wealthy from a wealthy nation and white, then you're an expat versus, if you're there for economic reasons or basically any other reason, then you're an
yeah.
immigrant. And I first learned about this because I went to graduate school there, and I don't know if I wrote an article or something, but a professor called it out, and he was very I think he did see it more as black and white of, like, you should never call yourself an expat, it's a terrible, terrible word, and I have the tendency, for better or worse, to I think a lot of people can't admit when they're wrong or don't know something fully, and so when I have an expert telling me something, I'll be like, "Oh, yeah, I don't it seems like you know what you're talking about." And I think I've softened a little bit because, like, I have met people from all kinds of cultural backgrounds in Germany who do call themselves an expat, and they don't necessarily fit into this narrative of, that only white people call themselves an expat. And I've met plenty of people, like I said, from all kinds of backgrounds who I presume call themselves an expat because they not necessarily view themselves as better, but they just view their time in whatever country, Germany in this example, as temporary. I've always called myself an immigrant to Germany because my intention it's hard I don't know if I get to be as aggressive to say that my intention was to set roots there. There was, a grace period in which I thought, like, we wanna make sure we like it here, and then maybe we'll stay. But my intention had always been to get citizenship in the European Union because I always even before I'd even gone to the continent, which is bizarre, just kind of felt like I would fit in better there and that my values better aligned with general European values. I always see on social media Europeans give Americans a hard time when they speak of Europe as a place, but I do feel there are a lot of shared values that perhaps people born there can't see or appreciate in the same way somebody who's like drawn to them because almost like a negative example, the US is the best country on earth. A lot of these values are just there. So you don't think about like, I can take the train, I can cycle, I can do these things that I can't do elsewhere. Those are things that I'm drawn to that people don't not necessarily think of as being like a reason somebody would move. So I guess go back to the immigration thing. I think I've always thought of myself as an immigrant because I had a sense that I was going to stay in some shape or form. And I have. I mean, I became a citizen back in July of Germany. So now I'm a German and EU citizen as well as an American citizen. So I never intended to just kind of have like a year abroad or whatever and go back. So I've always said, like, I'm an immigrant by definition. I immigrated. It's what I am.
I love this. I love this. I think for me, Joe, what you just told us about your thoughts of being a immigrant versus an expat, I think that's showcases so well maybe why you are a writer or one of the characteristics of being a writer because thinking about words, right, and what they mean and it's such a rabbit hole that we go down sometimes. I was also thinking about the fact that even the word expat has gotten that meaning relatively recently because actually the full word, the verb expatriate, to expatriate somebody is to move out, and to repatriate is to come back to the patri, right? Patri is in Latin, I think, the home country. And so that word used to be actually pretty neutral, expatriate, repatriate, but it's become that kind of a loaded term. But actually, what you said, I've never heard of that definition of like immigrant being there permanently and expat being there for some time. And, it makes a lot of sense to me
Well,
actually.
because I know at least in and this is why I was saying that I think it matters where in the world you're talking about. Because in Costa Rica, an expat was almost always kind of the negative definition that you see of, like, a privileged white person from a more privileged country, but in Germany, people do get hired on what are called expat contracts, and those are contracts where you work in the country for, like, a year, like, there's an end date, and then you're going back. There is no
Hmm.
you by and especially in Germany, you are not seen as somebody who is even earning credit, for lack of a better explanation, to become a citizen. You might not be paying into the local social security system, which you need to do for a certain period in order to get permanent residency or to be, as I did, become a citizen. So there are different contexts, and that's why, like, I think that is true with what you said about writers not liking simplistic definitions because as I was trying to say even in this Instagram post that you referenced at the beginning, it's a big world. There are all kinds of different cultures. The context matters and there's no simple answers to basically anything. Everything's nuanced. And so it just depends on where you're talking about. And so, yeah, in this instance, I moved. I intended to stay in some respect. So that makes me an immigrant. That's the definition.
Yeah, but we'll go with that. Why Germany though? Why was Germany the choice for you?
So it's funny you ask because I just wrote an article for Business Insider that's coming out, I guess soon. I don't know, but it's basically about this about why an American would move to another country. Of course, people often ask like why Germany because it's not at least especially if you grew up in the U.S. The first time you hear about Germany is World War II and the Holocaust, and nobody's thinking like, oh, what a place to move to. And especially people my age, you probably have grandparents who fought in the war or even directly fought against them, so it's very jarring. So it was never that I set out and said I want to move to Germany. This is my dream country. Like, I was in university and I can remember being in my room, like, just having this feeling that from what I was reading about different European countries, better access to nature through public transportation, you can hop on a train, you're close to all these different countries and cultures. I could sense that this was something that I would probably prefer, and so actually, this is when I had first gotten interested in genealogy. My surname comes from Swiss German, and it was really just my, like, second great grandfather, so, like, I'm just, like, a tiny, tiny, tiny bit Swiss, but that's the surname, and so I just was drawn to researching that, and I did find a cousin who a distant cousin who lives there, and I remember starting to look into Switzerland, like, "Oh, they got access to trains everywhere. They've got all these mountains, all this nature. It's great. I'm gonna try to move to Switzerland." But my only skill set at the time was that I was a personal trainer. And so I started writing to gyms and being like, I would like to move to Switzerland, please. Oh, by the way, I'm not a Swiss citizen. I'm not an EU citizen, which they have to look for before they hire somebody from a third state, which would be somebody from the US. And I don't speak any of the languages. So hire me? No. So that didn't work out so well. Try to make a long story short, years go by. I wanted to try living in Costa Rica to get like this taste of living in a different country. And Costa Rica felt accessible because my brother had studied abroad there. I had heard great things, and I also wanted to learn another language. And Spanish was, coming from the US as a natural language to be drawn toward. So my wife and I got married. A month later, we moved to Costa Rica, had a wonderful time there, as I said before, but I still felt like I wanted to live in a place where I could hop on a train and just go wherever I wanted. So we moved back to Cleveland for I think in total about a year, but pretty quickly was starting to look into like how can we make Europe happen. And I was very lucky. A lot of serendipitous things happened to allow me to get a job in Dusseldorf, Germany. And so in terms of why Germany, in retrospect, Germany, especially at that time, I think it's getting a little bit better in other countries, but especially at that time, was the only country in the European Union that was open to giving work visas to third state citizens. So I was able to get a job working at a German company, but my work focused on the US market. So it's easy to say we have to hire an American because that's my expertise. I know the US market as opposed to hiring a German. So if I wanted to Spain at first was like the natural thought because we just came from Costa Rica, we can feel comfortable in Spanish. but I didn't feel as much as my Spanish improved, I didn't feel like I could jump into an office environment on day 1 and keep up with everybody as, like, with people who's been speaking it since birth. And so, like I said, Germany was more open to third state immigrants, and so really that's why it happened. Like, I'd never heard of Dusseldorf before this opportunity came up, but remember I had the interview and we looked it up, it's like, "Looks cool. Let's just go for it." And so we were there for 3 years, and now it's been 5 years in Berlin, and, I love Germany. Whenever I say this, I give that caveat. I've been very appreciative of my time there, but we never thought of leaving because, like I said, it was always my intention to get citizenship wherever we ended up, and so we could have a permanent foot on the European continent, and once you're there, if you leave, you kind of start the clock over on being able to get permanent residency or citizenship. So it just made sense. Like, we enjoy our lives here, so we'll stay here. And now I have citizenship. My wife should get it any day now. And so we'll see what the future holds. We like to be more flexible, but that's why Germany in the long answer.
Yeah, and how smart right now to have that second citizenship, right? But you mentioned this or you alluded to this earlier a bit, and I wonder since moving to, Germany and specifically Berlin now where you've been for 5 years, how has your view on what a good life is has changed?
I would say when I was in the US, I think I started to sense that what a good life is by the typical mainstream culture of what the American definition is. I think I started to sense early on that that wasn't for me. Like, get a house and get married. I mean, I liked the married part. Very happy with that. So I don't want to like down that. Very happy with that part, but it's usually get married, buy a house in the suburbs, have kids, you
Get
work
a
the same job.
mortgage, two-car garage.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Big
So I mean, and I hate cars and driving. I hate being like shackled to a car and having that being my primary mode of transportation. So early on, I had the sense that that wasn't for me. So I didn't necessarily know why. That was part of the motive for me to want to move to somewhere in Europe was to get a sense of like, is the grass greener for me someplace else? And I have found that it is for me. So I think, and this is also changing. Like I have found, and I speak to other American immigrants in Germany about this. I have a good friend. We talk about this all the time. That we're always jarred when we come back here by the commercialism of things, and there's still like this, like you got to buy that, and I like watching sports. I watch my hometown teams, and every 2 seconds there's a new commercial about go buy this massive obnoxious truck, and after you buy the obnoxious truck, go get this burger squished with the fried chicken with bacon on it, and then just back and forth, and it's very jarring. Is I'm just not drawn to like getting things. For the longest time, I've said like, if you're gonna buy me a present, I don't want a thing. Like I don't need another thing. So I've always felt that like living in Germany, living space is naturally much smaller, so you don't feel the desire to buy stuff. Like we don't have a car, so we don't have a trunk to just like go buy stuff and throw it in there and keep it in there. We don't have a huge house, so we don't just buy things to fill it up with things. And this isn't to say that, our life in Germany is utopia. Like I have my issues too with how things work there as well. And I don't think this is a German thing or a US thing. I think just societally, especially in the West, I feel like I sound like a little bit insufferable when I just go capitalism and blame capitalism. But I do blame capitalism for a lot of things.
You know what? You know what? It's falling on very appreciative ears because I'm right there with you, my friend.
Yeah.
I've become very, this disliking of capitalism system and the system that we live in.
Yeah. And it's so like, and obviously that's Germany has much as stronger socialist systems in play, democratic socialist systems in play, but there's still, a capitalist move to, work, 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 and especially with like we just had an election yesterday, and the party that won is definitely one that's more of like work doesn't there doesn't seem to me as much desire, whether it's in Germany or in the US, to like try to find meaning in your life, fulfillment in your life. Maybe you get lucky and your day job is something that fulfills you and makes you feel like you're making a difference in the world, but 95 or more percent of people just have a job to have a job because that's what you're told to do. So I think as I've gotten older, and now that I have the passport and we're starting to feel like we'll have a little bit more flexibility, I'm starting to value not worry, like, I never was one to worry about money, but to just pursue things that I'm passionate in and just, be cognizant of finances, but to make sure that I find meaning in the work I do and to find personal fulfillment in that. Like, I'm hopefully in some small way making the world a better place, all that, bitch schmaltzy stuff. And I don't know if that's necessarily something that I learned in Europe or if that just came with age. I mean, I guess maybe Germany made that evolution happen a little bit faster because living there with the infrastructure that they have that the US doesn't has facilitated the opportunities for me to go hop on a train. Like, I was never really a big outdoorsy guy when I lived in the US. I went backpacking once, but living in Germany where you could just hop on a train, have a weekend getaway, go on a long hike or do whatever, that's what made me like a big outdoorsy person. So basically a lot of my career, especially in writing, is thanks to being in Germany. Like, two of the things I write about most, outdoor stuff and, Jewish food and culture, I didn't really do until I moved to Germany for a variety of reasons. So I don't, I'm probably not answering your question at all, doing a terrible job, but there's a lot of things that I think have happened moving to Germany that I could probably credit to Germany versus the US, and things that maybe just would have happened naturally through age. That's hard to say without having a camera into a parallel universe where I did stay in the US and be able to compare how the lives turned out.
Yeah. Well, your path up to this point, like you said, it's been heavily impacted by your staying in Germany for the last 8 years. And as you're saying all these things, I'm like, God, why am I here in the States? Why didn't I go back to Europe? Because I miss all of those things that you're discussing, right? That car-centric culture that we have that I
Yeah.
absolutely hate, but I'm also part of it now. Because even in Chicago, I live in the city now, but I have to take a car everywhere because I mean, the public transportation system has just never worked in the US the same way that it has in Europe, And it's a choice, by the way, which we know, right? It's a choice. It's not that we cannot do it, it's that we choose not
It's the greatest country on earth. Of course they can do it.
exactly. And so yeah, I mean everything you're saying really resonates with you. And I wonder, well, I guess we kind of already partially arrived at this answer or the story, but I was wondering where do the origins of this sort of travel writing, travel filmmaking lie for you? You say on your website that you love telling unique food and travel stories, and and you've traveled widely in the last 8 years: Kenya, Panama, Laos. You also now travel to run and cover some very amazing races, which we're gonna get into in a minute. But where does the origin of that lie for you? Is it when you move? Because it sounds like you were in a different job before, and then you switched to this career at some point when you were in Germany.
I've been doing travel writing in some form since it's easy for me to remember because I had my first assignment like right when I met my wife. So it was basically 12, close to 13 years ago. The origin was probably in college, and I was approaching my senior year, and I was kind of like, I haven't studied abroad or done anything like that, but my brother did. He went to Costa Rica. I should do something. And try to make a long story short, I ended up spending summer living on a Tibetan campus in northern India, where the Tibetan government in exile is based. And I made,
As one does.
yeah, as one does, as one typical white boy suburbanite from in the US just pops on over to a Tibetan campus in India. So it was a great program, and I loved my time there. And my project was to make a film. So it wasn't travel writing, but you start to practice those muscles that a travel writer develops, sensing that like the smells are different, the colors are different, the atmosphere is different, the religion, the scripts that people write. Like we were looking at, there's the Hindi script, there's a Tibetan script, there's all these different things you start to perceive are unique, and it just starts to develop those thoughts that you have and those muscles. And so then after that, after I graduated, I don't started to slip eventually into a more typical American lifestyle, which, just for context for anybody listening, who I'm not trying to bash what the typical American lifestyle is. It just wasn't for me. If people like, the 9 to 5, drive to work, wife and kids, God bless you. It just wasn't for me. So I try to be clear. Like, I'm not
Or
saying that
husband
one's
and
better,
kid.
or husband and kids, whatever. Yeah, exactly. Husbands and thruples, whatever works for you. Thruples and kids, that's great. So I just try to be clear about that because sometimes people are like, "Well, you're American bashing." Like, I know, it's just what you prefer. So um, But so yeah, I was going through some early stages of, having the job, working, driving to work, all this stuff. And I think I was about 4 years after India that I was like, I haven't traveled anywhere outside of like my home state. I really want to plan a trip and go someplace again. And so then I did, and I realized I went to Ireland, and I was like, I can't wait 4 years to do this again. And around that time, I became aware of Matador Network. They're still around. They're a travel publication, and they had like an application to go cover a music festival in Canada where you would paddle across Lake Ontario on a Voyager canoe, like a 17th century French Voyager canoe. Paddle across it for a handful of days, and then you end and camp at this music festival. And so that was my first writing assignment. I even had a little camera that I did put together like a glorified travel music video of the trip. Uh, and so that was my first experience doing it. I was like, "Oh, you can do this," and, it's not like you get paid a lot, but one of the things I've learned over time is that I'd rather get, paid little, but have all these great opportunities and make a lot of money, but just be stressed all the time and, not expanding my horizons ever. So that was my first taste into it. Living in Costa Rica and traveling around Central America certainly exposed me to more opportunities to do that. I helped launch the Tico Times travel section, which is a English speaking newspaper based in San Jose in Costa Rica. And so I was able to do travel stories from El Salvador, Guatemala, throughout Costa Rica, Panama as well. And then it was never my like main job. I just kept like trying to come back to it, trying to honestly make it my main job in some form because I love it so much. And yes, now I wouldn't say even now I'm a full-time travel writer because I think unless you're like famous, I think it's impossible to be a full-time travel writer unless you're like David Attenborough or something or Rick Steves. You have to have other things you're doing. I'm just lucky that the other things I'm doing, like covering trail running or some food writing or specifically Jewish food, like I love doing those things. But I do try to incorporate travel as much as I can into those things and continually pursue it. And I don't know, maybe one day it will be my full-time thing, but I also have multiple interests and sometimes they overlap. So I'm happy to keep exploring things because like I said, 8 years ago, I wouldn't be writing about Jewish food. I wouldn't be writing about trail running. I'm happy to see how my interests evolve and keep writing about them. So that was kind of like yet another long answer for origin story to whatever the hell I'm doing now.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I find that most of the people who I meet in this industry, in the travel space, are like you and I, because I'm exactly like you, right? In the sense that I took a huge pay cut.
You look better on camera than me, so we're not exactly alike. I'm a little schlubby right now.
Nothing that great lighting can fix, by the way. So, just get a nice light and that'll take care of it. But, I was a brand manager and I was on that pathway that we're talking about throughout today, right? And that pathway to the picket fence and the mortgage. And, I was making great money, but I was so miserable. Now I'm making significantly less money, but I love what I do. And like you, I agree with your exploration that travel writing is, I think of myself as storyteller these days, and whatever form or shape that takes, that it's all part of storytelling for me. And even like film and like travel films and travel writing, those have so much in common as well, right? It's at the end of the day, you're telling stories. And I've actually been lucky enough to watch Joe work in Okinawa, which we're also going to talk about Okinawa in a bit. But I saw how you do it, and I kind of looked at the process, and yeah, I think it's quite similar in a way to telling stories through writing. But let's actually get into one of the experiences that I wanted to bring you on the podcast about. We've been talking for almost 40 minutes. We haven't gotten to that part yet, but it's okay. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Sorry about that.
No, no, it's good. It's all the good. It's actually for me, this is a good sign because these are all topics that are very interesting. But our listeners will just have to forgive us that the headline of this episode is going to say Oman desert running, but we we don't get into it until minute 40.
Well, it's like one of those long art films where, like, you're like, "What does this have to do with the title?" But then, like, at the end of the movie, you're like, "Oh, that's what it was." So, okay. All the stuff that we've talked about so far does eventually lead to Oman.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And podcasts do the same kind of clickbaity thing anyway. I find that they'll find the most juiciest thing about And even the heavy hitters in the industry do that, like Fresh Air, for example. I don't know if you listen to Fresh Air. I love Fresh Air from NPR. And, I've noticed them several times do that. Like they will have this amazing headline, and then it's a quote that the guest said maybe at the end of the interview or something. So we have creative liberties to do that.
There you go.
But you've run already a number of incredible races like the Ninja Trail Run in Japan or the Berlin Marathon. And so I have two questions for you. One, what motivates you to travel to run? Because I haven't met a lot of people who do that, who travel to specifically take part in something so grueling. Maybe because I'm not really a runner. That's my imagination of it. Although I used to run, but that's a whole other story. And then the second one, why did you decide to do it in the desert of Oman, of all places?
So the first one, why do I do these things? It's a question that I'm also trying to continually explore in the work I do and my writing. Like, why do people do these things? Even when I finish this Oman Desert Marathon, because I'm also turning that into a film. I asked people that, and I remember this Irish guy, his name's Shane. I asked him, and he just kind of like it's hard to articulate. For some people, they say, and this relates to me a little bit, they would say, like, oh, I'm privileged to have a healthy body and I want to be able to see what it can do while I have it. Some people, like, they have kids or they want to have kids. They say they want to be able to, like, point back to to their grandchildren, what their grandfather or grandmother did one day way back when. So those are some of the reasons, and I can relate to that. Like, I do feel privileged that I am, for the most part, healthy, and I just like to see what I'm capable of. There is an indescribable feeling of after you accomplish the hard thing and it's over, you're like, I don't I don't know what the swearing policy is here, but you're just like, "Oi, I can't believe I did this." Like, you're just so like floored by it, and so and they call that there's type 1 fun, type 2 fun, and type 3 fun. Type 1 being things that are fun during and after as you reflect on it. Type 2 fun being things that weren't super fun during, but when you look back, you're like, "Oh my gosh, that was incredible." And usually trail running kind of, especially ultra marathons, like once you cross that threshold of like this is going to physically hurt you, that's when you get into type 2 fun. And so yeah, I remember being in a race in North Macedonia, bugs flying across my face, and I don't usually wear headphones on trail races, but I had to put them in because they were landing inside my ear and just buzzing. It was just the worst feeling ever. And my legs are tired. I've been on the trail for, almost 9+ hours at that point. I didn't love it at the moment, but once you cross the finish line, you're like, oh, I gotta do another one. I gotta do another one. That was just great. So that's kind of how I got into it and why I like it. But it's developed over time because I've been very lucky. A couple years ago, I pitched a series or a column for Outside Magazine about covering the food that different cultures eat in order to fuel themselves as they're doing these, bonkers challenges, these big endurance challenges. And the first one was about ancient Greece, looking at what they were doing. But over time, I started to realize, like, oh, I can go actually run in some of these races, meet people firsthand, and tell their story, and also incorporate like what kind of food they eat. Like you mentioned the Ninja Trail one. That was one where I was able to run in the race, interview some folks locally. I was very grateful that I had a translator who was able to help me out a lot, and also learn about the food that they eat, either to prepare for a run, to eat while they're running, or something that they might eat to celebrate. Like the woman who won her race, all she could talk about was udon. She was just like, "I love udon." The prize she got for winning the women's race was udon, and so I've never seen a person so happy. So having the opportunity to go do these things that like are personally fulfilling in terms of like testing myself out, testing my body out, but also I get to hear these unique stories that you really don't hear anywhere else. Because like there are places in the world that don't have as much travel or tourism industry that you can still find and still tell incredible stories, and I really like doing that. But with trail running and outdoor adventures, you can still go to places like Japan, which is probably one of the most popular countries to travel to in the world, and still find these parts of the country that are lesser traveled, where there are a lot of these stories that people don't know about. Like, I didn't know that this is where ninja culture derived from. And it just kind of combines all my interests. I can go travel a little bit more off the beaten path, meet like-minded people who care about the same things I do, and with whatever abilities I have, I'm able to help tell their story. But what's important to me is I don't ever want to be one of those YouTubers who just always keeps the camera on themselves. I'm able to, especially again in this case with the help of translators, thank God, able to point the camera on them and just let them tell their own story. And I could use whatever means I have to help amplify those local voices and let them tell their own freaking story instead of, just relying on me.
I love that so much, Joe. And actually, it was, something I was going to ask you about later on because it resonated with me so much because you bring it up in a couple of places, in your writing and in your website. But again, that's one of the reasons why I think you and I connected because I mean, that is me as well. For me, I rarely do stories that place me in a certain environment. For me, it's always the stories of people that I'm most enthralled by. That's why also I guess I'm not an influencer, I'm a travel journalist because I love telling stories of people and telling the stories through their own voices about their lives, about their cultures, about what they do. I think it's so important now more than ever. It's always been important, but it feels like, you know, sometimes it feels to me that we have become so self-centric and so we also all live in our own like personal bubbles that we don't really like we hear and we see what our algorithms are showing us. We don't really go outside of that on all sides of the spectrum, right? I'm not saying this is an issue with just one particular group. I feel like that's something that we all do because that's the we live in a world where the algorithm decides for us what we see and what we read and what we consume, which is kind of scary, honestly. But so to be able to have those stories of people who are so different from you and then to find commonalities with them and to find that at the end of the day, you all care about the same things. At least for me, it's always been incredibly like powerful, and that's the feeling that I want to convey to the world through all the stories that I do and the work that I do. And I feel like you are the same with your work. And like I mentioned earlier, I watched you work in Japan, and I was so amazed to see how you were always interviewing all the people that we met or we traveled with or that we had on the trip and I was like, "Oh, okay, I see what Joe is doing. He's not out there in front of the, like, hey, look at me. I'm going through this thing." He's interviewing all these people, and that's when I was like, "Yeah, that's amazing. I want to get to know Joe more too because that very much resonates with me."
But actually, what you're touching on is interesting because I'm not camera shy. Like I can be throw myself in front of a camera and jump around and be silly or whatever. I actually like doing that. But for travel purposes, I've been aggressive about not really just being kind of like a narrator or whatever in the videos I make. But I've been trying because you said that you like seeing, maybe not the like Japan or Okinawa in this case, like in that video that I made through my perspective. And so I've been trying to be better about actually putting myself in it a little bit because I do think about like, the travel folks, authors, presenters that I like, and it is because I do enjoy their perspective. So I have been trying to do, and I did not do a good job of it in Okinawa. Like, there's a couple of shots in me, and that's about it. But I have been trying to be better about sharing my experience because even if I don't show up on camera, it's still my experience and it's still filtered through my perception. So I've been trying to be better, a little bit better about owning that and having my face on there and actually talking a little bit to the camera and saying what I'm feeling and thinking. And I do that in the Oman Desert Marathon videos that I'll have coming out soon. But still, always the focus for what I do will hopefully always just be on the people who live there, call the place home, and because 'cause they're gonna know more about it than I ever will.
100%. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think even I'm working on developing a concept for a TV show
Ooh,
which is
something
very similar for to that, right? It's like I'm hosting it and you will see me in some of the places and some of the interactions, but it will be telling stories of a place through the people that live there with me as the host. So yes, you will see me for sure, but it's not going to be the story of Yulia traveling to Okinawa.
right.
It's going to be the story of Okinawa and its people hosted by Yulia. So that's kind of, I guess, the thing. And look at us, we are delivering so well on our promise of talking about Oman Marathon. I love it.
I mentioned it a couple of times.
That's not
Get the word out there.
I know, right? That's so funny. But so let's talk about the Oman Marathon for a bit. It's a 4-day race. It's
5.
102. Oh, okay, 5-day race, 102 miles, and you're running through the deserts the whole time.
Yep. Yes, and learned this also as well in my research. So you're running through Bedouin silk trade routes in the desert, and yeah, I mean, there's nothing. There's like hardly anything. It's truly you see some Bedouin homes along the way, camels, of course, that they've domesticated, and yeah, you're truly running through the desert, and like not there are like even the desert roads, like they're still soft, they're still sand. So physically it is quite draining, especially when you're climbing a sand dune. Like it's just like walking on air. And one or like it feels like one step when you're in a forest is like four steps when you're in the desert, just because it takes so much energy to get over this pillowy soft sand. But yeah, that's the thing I did. Signed up for it.
And that was the Wahiba Sands. So I was there in 2019, and for me, listeners of this podcast know I love deserts. Deserts are my
I know that too. You talked about it in Okinawa.
see, I'm consistent. I talk about it everywhere. But it's so interesting how there is almost no one desert that is alike another desert out there. At least for so far, all the deserts I've seen in the world, they're all so very different. And what really strikes me about the Wahiba Sands in Oman is that it is truly one of the like purest definitions of deserts that you could find, because there is literally nothing but sand there. Like in Wadi Ram, for example, which is my favorite desert and place, there's mountains, there's vegetation, there's people living in the desert. There's so much there. In the Death Valley as well, in California, for example, there's so much vegetation and there's all these landscapes and mountains. But in Wahiba Sands, it's literally just dunes, sand, and that's it. It's incredible how I don't even know how you would run through something like that.
You don't run often, you hike because you just can't. Except there are a lot of Moroccans who ran it and Omanis, and they grew up with this stuff. So you're like schlepping up a dune and you're like dying, but then you just watch them like a gazelle go up the thing. So it can be done, but considering I'm a flatlander with no sand nearby, I was definitely not moving at their pace.
And I think I was also listening to another interview you did about this race, and there you said, you're running in midday heat, and that really strikes me because why would you do that? Like, why wouldn't you run like early in the morning and late at night, for example, and then hide from the sun the rest of
Well, because
the time?
the distances are such that we start at I think the earliest was 6:30 in the morning, and sunrise is, like, around that time, at least in January. So we started usually about as early as we could, but the distances were so long that and the climbing's so much that you're gonna run through the midday heat. You can't really avoid it unless you started later, and day 4 was a night stage where I started at 4 o'clock, so I had basically 3/4 of the run. I had daylight and sunset light, and then I had about an hour or so just in complete darkness with a lamp on my head. So yeah, that's why you have to deal with the midday heat, because there's really no time of day to start where you avoid it unless you do only run through the middle of the night. But as hot as it was, like you said, you get to see some of the most incredible untouched sand vistas that I haven't traveled as many deserts as you probably. I have been to Wadi Rum, but I think it's very unique in the world and how untouched it is, and you get those like very romantic rolling dunes views, and you can't see that in the middle of the night. So midday desert heat, you got to deal with it.
Did you understand something about Oman by running in its desert or meeting Omanis that were running there with you?
I mean, maybe you feel this way too, but I hesitate ever to say I know much of anything. It's a bit cliche, but I do feel like the more I travel, the more places I go, the more I realize I don't know. I think running through the deserts in Oman revealed to me as much about the culture in the same way as running through anywhere that I have. You just see how a unique culture and group of people live their lives, and you see it and experience it more intimately, especially in this race because it was a stage race and we were sleeping in Bedouin tents and we weren't like going into a hotel in between. So we got to experience it more firsthand and intimately than like the one in Japan where that is just a day race. Like you run it and then you go back to the hotel. That's not to say I wasn't able to absorb cultural elements in that race. I very much was. It was called the Ninja Trail Run. So, of course, I experienced a lot of local culture, but that's something that I perhaps was able to take away more from this one than other races was just really seeing like when you're running, the local Bedouins would honk at you as they like speed by in their trucks and wave at you, give a thumbs up or whatever. And so just having more of those even tiny, tiny fraction of a second interactions, you can get a sense of like, oh, this is like what they do. Like they drive out. Because correct me if I'm wrong, because maybe you know better than I do, but most Bedouins, I think in Oman, aren't actually nomadic anymore. Like they have more of like a settled residence, but they still have like their place in the desert where maybe their camel is or their livestock is or goats. So you could really experience, over those days, watching them drive out, go do their thing, and then drive back out. They honk and wave at you and give a thumbs up because you're the idiot who's schlepping around with a backpack with 5 days worth of food. And then with the people, like just being able to see, like, oh, yeah, like environment matters in terms of physical ability. One of the top runners, actually, of this race, they said that they had him perform at a race in, I think maybe somewhere in the US, just like a quote unquote normal trail race, like forest or whatever. He did much better than I would ever do, but he wasn't like the number one runner like he was in the desert because that's his environment. Yeah, and the same to this woman who's won it like the Oman Desert Marathon. She's won it so many times. She's like the queen of the desert out there, but you put people in a different environment, you don't maybe do as well, still much better than a regular runner like me. So it's really cool to see people in their natural environment, just like eating up the sand, like it's no big deal. And then going back to the camp at the end of the day and having enough energy to go grab driftwood and start up a fire and make tea.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's so funny. You said when you said like the environment matters or you realize that environment matters, I thought you were going to take it into a completely different route with like I realized how incredible nature is and that we need to protect it or something.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, yeah, no, environment matters in a literal sense of in terms of influencing how you can move your body and which environments you thrive the most. But yes, obviously I care about protecting the environment too. So that too.
Let's throw that disclaimer in there. Did you have a chance to go elsewhere in Oman after the race? Have you seen the mountains, the Al Hajar Mountains?
I don't know if I saw those mountains specifically. I saw Muscat, Wadi Shab. We went diving by the I'm gonna pronounce it wrong, Diminiat Islands, scuba diving we did out there. So it was mostly just like seeing around the city, a lot of the history, like went to this Portuguese fort, to the Sultan's palace, all those things, into the souk, Wadi Shab for like a short hike, and then also going through the waters, and then you float down for a little bit further and you go inside this cave and there's a waterfall. And we kind of started our journey going deeper into the desert to, get ready for the race. But so I got to see a little bit. I would love to go to Salalah in
Yeah.
the south. I read this, I forget the name of the author off the top of my head, but I read a book about Omani history before I went to just kinda try to understand things a bit better, and it clicked off some places that like Salalah, I think it's the Green Mountain, some of these places that, in the future I would love to go to if I were able to return, but I'm super grateful for what I did get to see, definitely.
Yeah, Oman really amazed me when I went there. It's such a place that's still not very well known in the traveler psyche, I would say. You know, people don't really travel there that often, and I loved the landscape. I loved those very sharp, jagged mountains, the peaks of the mountains, and I loved all the goats. By the way, I've seen many goats in my life now because I tend to travel to places that have a lot of.
The head goats. Goat-friendly destinations.
For sure, but, like, the goats that I've seen in Oman were some of the most beautiful and stylish goats I've ever seen, long hair, really gorgeous. I don't know, they upkeep them very well somehow because 'cause they're some of the prettiest goats I've ever seen, so I'd go back to Oman in a heartbeat as well. You said somewhere that your goal is to increasingly to age in reverse, to get closer to the freedom of
Yeah.
childhood abandon.
Yep, that sounds like something I said.
Say more about that.
Well, it's just, and I credit a little bit. So on the flight back to the US, I watched this movie called My Old Ass. I think it was My Old Ass, that had this quote, and one of the characters is a guy named Chad. He asks, the the lead character of the story, young woman, basically asking her like, "Oh, do you remember the last time that you went riding on your bike and ran away from zombies or something like that?" And she's like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, there's one day for however long of your life, you hop on a bike, you're cycling with your friends, you're like pretending like, "Oh, there's zombies chasing us. We gotta cycle, we gotta go hide here, blah blah blah." And then one day you run away from the zombies, you go home, park your bike, and you never do it again. And there's no like moment that you think like, I'm not gonna run away from the zombies anymore. There's no zombies. You just stop playing. You stop kind of engaging in that game. And that example or thought kind of stuck with me over, the first handful of days of my visit back to the US. And I wrote something for my newsletter just saying how I've been doing this and that kind of reemphasized that I want to keep doing this. I can't Benjamin Button myself. I can't actually physically age in reverse. So there's like, that guy who spends like $1 million a day or whatever it is on supplements to physically age himself in reverse. But I want to be able to continue rediscovering my childhood youth, or like you said, the childhood abandoned, and try to live in some respect that way because I feel like we were talking about the typical trajectory in life, school, marriage, house, mortgage, kids, work, 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 work. And then when you're old, it occurs to me like I'm sure we've all had like a grandparent or somebody who like they say something that they're maybe not supposed to say, be like, that's grandma, it's fine, or whatever. So it's so strange to me that like as kids, we get a lot of forgiveness for either the things we say or the way we explore things or do things like, oh, you're not supposed to cross that road, but it's okay, you're a kid, you're learning. And then nothing for like a solid, like, I don't know, 50 or more years. But then when you're old, it's like, oh, you can do whatever you want again. And then like, why does it have to be those two time periods? Why can't you live your life continually to explore things with the same curiosity that you did as a kid? So that's just who you are. I mean, I think that is who we all are to a certain extent. We all started that way as kids. It's just that our environments and society and all these capitalism, if you throw that buzzword in again, it drains the joy out of our lives that we don't feel like exploring anymore. And, we're more careful. And in some respects, we should be more careful about what we say. But I appreciate how kids will sometimes just be very blunt and be like, why is this like that? Or why do you say this? And I feel like we just could introduce a little bit more of that kind of childhood abandonment into our lives, and I think it would lead to richer, more fulfilling lives for everybody, whether that is, you know, asking people things you've always wanted to ask them or go, you know, I always hear some people saying like, "Oh, we wanna go do this trip, but now's not the right time," or, "We wanna save up a little bit more," and, like, just go, like, whatever it is, whatever you can afford, whatever you have time to, just go. Go get the treehouse hotel, spend a night, go run around the forest, just, like, go do it now because it's cliche, but you don't know what tomorrow's gonna bring, and there's no reason that you should wait until you're old to kinda get that societal forgiveness to do whatever you want because 'cause you're old and it's quirky and cute again. Like, no, just live your life how you wanna live it. Who knows what the hell's gonna happen tomorrow?
I think that's a good message to leave our listeners with.
I hope so anyway.
Very good directive. No, I mean, again, I think that's why you and I are in this career in this place because we have had that call. That call was perhaps stronger for us, or we could not ignore it as much as other people can, maybe, or at least that's how I've always felt like I hear the call of some different path or some different lifestyle, and so I could not I tried to ignore it, but I could not ignore it any longer. So it brought me here, and it seems like it's quite similar for you, Joe. I would love to keep talking to you, but I think we gotta bring you back for the podcast because there's a lot of questions actually that we didn't cover today. I really wanted to get into some of the other things, like for example, how on earth do you know so much about Ukrainian food? But we'll leave it for another episode because that's something that I really want to talk to you about again. But two questions that I want to ask you today as we close. First, what gives you hope in this year ahead? And which place are you going to next?
Oh boy. I'll go with the next place first because that's easier. I am taking the train down from Berlin to Bologna, and I will spend the following 4 days running the Via degli Dei, the Path of the Gods Trail. It's 130-ish kilometers, so that's, I don't know, like 80 some miles, I think, between Bologna and Florence. And I'll be running that to meeting people along the way to kind of tell the story of this region, the trail, the people who built it, why did they build it here? Because it's a part of Italy that obviously people know Bologna, they know Florence, but this area, these mountains in between, I think are a little bit less known. So I'm excited to I'm gonna fast pack it. So it'll be similar in Oman to the extent that I'm gonna have a bigger backpack and running along the trail. But I've been honestly, last year I wanted to start doing more fast packing, but this will be my first true fast pack where I'm not getting a medal at the end. There's no race or nothing. I'm just going on this trail, interested to learn more about it and hopefully tell an interesting story along the way. And I've got some other things cooking for the rest of the year.
Amazing. And we'll be sure to follow along on Instagram, on YouTube, and newsletter. We'll link to all those in the show notes so you guys can check out Joe's work. By the way, Joe also has a podcast called Travel Tomorrow, which we also didn't get to talk about today, but check it out as well. So, what gives you hope?
I almost got out of it. What gives me hope? I've been, as you mentioned, I've been very privileged and fortunate, lucky to have gone to a lot of places in the world, and I've been to places that either are or have faced great conflict, war, you name it. And whenever I'm in those places, when I meet individuals who are, I don't like to say on either side because I don't necessarily love the binary because no matter what the issue is, it's all a spectrum. But I've been fortunate to meet people face to face. Like, I have never met anybody who wished harm on another individual or wished harm on the supposed other side. And one of the main memories that comes to mind for that, I was in El Salvador and we were in Xochitoto, which is not to get too much down a rabbit hole, but for folks who might not know, they had a very terrible civil war in, I think it was like the 80s, maybe it stretched on to the early 90s. And it was very important to me to learn more about that because the US was very much culpable in funding the government side. And so I went to Xochitoto in the north, and this town, it's a very beautiful cobblestone village. I'm seeing it right now, and I wish I could go there. And that was like kind of the base of the rebel side, that the U.S. government was funding against. And in this area, I went on a hike, and one of the guys who was leading the hike was a soldier on the rebel side, and he like held no ill will towards the other side. And I just thought that was incredible. These folks were fighting, and you see this in other aspects. Like, there's lots of stories of like American Vietnam vets going to Vietnam and meeting people who fought for Vietnam, and like they have a beer and they get along, and it all makes me back to me thinking about like World War One, which is like one of the most pointless wars ever. It's absolutely bonkers that that thing happened, and it's all people being told to dislike these people, kill these people. But then when you sit them down next to each other, that speaking of World War, it's like the story of Joyeux Noel, the Christmas Eve in World War One, where they were like, "Well, we don't want to shoot each other on Christmas, so let's put our guns down and drink." And the French and the Brits and the Germans, they all like celebrate. And then next they were like, "Well, people on up high are telling us to shoot each other again, so I guess that's what we got to do." And so, like going around the world, a lot of these countries and cultures that have experienced these wars, conflicts, whatever you call them, that's what gives me hope. Is having met people around the world who have faced things that I can never imagine facing, and they still, many of them seem to harbor no ill will to those who wrong them, and they just want to live their lives in peace.
I guess the question to follow up that with is why do we listen to the people above us that tell us to hate other people? But we'll leave that question for another podcast, another conversation with Joe. Joe, it was wonderful to have you on today. Thank you so much for
Thanks, Julia.
sharing your stories with us. I loved getting to know more about your work today and about your experiences. And you got to come back and so we can talk more.
I would be absolutely thrilled to do that. Thank you so much.
Going Places shares stories that help us imagine a better way to live, create, and travel. We are located on the traditional unceded Anishinaabe homeland. Our lovely new theme music is Altercations by Matt Nicholson at Big Score Audio. Our editor is Luciana Boss. We are reader supported. Take care and safe travels.